Hello and welcome to On the Kerbs Pub Chat. I am one of your hosts, Thiemo Albers-Daly, and this time around I am joined once again by motorsport and pub regular Jacob Phillips. How you doing?
I'm doing very well, team. I'm glad to join you again in the pub on this fine day. And what a fine day it is, although it might not be a fine day when you're watching it at home because it will take a few days to come out. But right now is a fine day outside, and what better way to start the day by talking about motorsport, Timo?
And if it's not a fine day when you're listening to this, close your eyes, sit back, relax, and just picture a nice quiet day. And you maybe have headphones on whilst listening to this, so it's basically a nice day because you're at the pub, so it's all good. This time, however, we're going to zoom into the world of F1 a little bit more with a focus on Red Bull and their junior drivers. So it's no secret, obviously, that there's quite a roster of them, but with only 4 seats available in Formula One at an absolute maximum, there's quite simply not enough space for them. So, what does and what will Red Bull do with all of these drivers? Essentially, that's what we're going to discuss here. And I'm going to kick things off by going through the long list of drivers. We'll do some pausing in between so we can talk about these in turn, so that it's not just me going on for 10 years about the entire list of drivers that they have. But obviously, we've got Verstappen and Perez at Red Bull, with officially Ricciardo and Tsunoda at AlphaTauri, but that's been a bit different recently because of Liam Lawson subbing in for Ricciardo since his injury. We'll kick things off with Liam Lawson there, 13th and 11th in F1 at Zandvoort and Monza, and he's currently P2 in Super Formula, 8 points away from P1 with a round to go. So, get your thoughts on the five of them very quickly, the five of those drivers that we've essentially got in Formula One at the moment.
Well, this is a bit of a headache, isn't it, Tim? All these drivers I'm looking at here, and only 4 seats, and it's a headache, not of the hangover variety. I know we're in a pub, but it's an actual headache to actually get our heads around. I'll start with Max Verstappen there. I mean, do we need to say more about him, really? He's the world champion. He's world champion elect for this year as well. It'll only be a matter of time before he wins a third championship and probably a fourth and fifth into the future as well. So he's there for the long haul. He's got a contract till 2028. And I think he's one of the drivers in F1, like Hamilton, probably the only two drivers in F1, those two drivers I mentioned there, that can probably dictate when they stay in F1 till. If Max Verstappen at the end of 28 says, do you know what, give me another 5-year contract, I'm still young enough, Red Bull will hand it to him on a plate. He's going nowhere for the time being, although there have been rumours that he has got a little bit bored out in front and he wants some more competition. So we'll see what happens there. If we get another scenario like this year, next year, we're praying to God, Thiemo, that we don't, because I don't know how we can live with another year of 2023 style F1.
A lot more
He might get a bit
politics, I
bored.
think.
Yeah, it will be. I'm not even going to think about that. Let's stick with what we got here. Yeah, then he might decide to go elsewhere. But for the time being, that seat is taken. So effectively, we've now got 3 seats. Perez. Perez is one of those drivers where I think he's safe at 24, although there's rumours that he might be replaced. Will Ricciardo come up? Now he's got his problems, so he's potentially been scuppered a little bit. He does enough to get Red Bull their championship. He gets podium, the odd win here and there. He's never going to upset the apple cart. He's never going to trip over Max. He's never going to pose a problem to the team where they have to decide who's number one driver, although we obviously know what the answer is. I think he'll be there for 24, and then he might sail off into the Mexican sunset and go spend some time with his family. But for the time being, he'll be there for next year. Ricciardo, well, we do love Ricciardo on this series, don't we, Timo? We're absolutely massive fans of him, and we'd love to get him on at some point if that's ever a possibility. But
Got to
Ricciardo,
manifest it.
Ricciardo, well, obviously he's got his injuries at the moment, isn't he? He's out until I think Singapore at the
It is kind of
earliest.
where the problems start arising for this whole conversation, really, isn't it? Because he might be
Yeah,
back for Singapore, he might not be, but it is this kind of thing there of if Perez was going to get replaced, like we were talking about just there, he is the obvious contender for it, which for someone like Yuki Tsunoda or even Liam Lawson is a bit of a problem for you because
yeah.
you need to like Liam Lawson potentially less so, but for Yuki it becomes a real stickler of a situation of what happens in his future. And remember, we've been talking before, it would be a shame to see Ricciardo staying at AlphaTauri for another full season. And obviously, we would not be the only ones thinking that aside from Ricciardo himself, because you've got all these drivers, including Liam Lawson in Formula 2 there, who, with one round left to go of that championship this year, they're all looking to see if they can do something to convince Helmut Marko that they can be that second driver alongside whoever is in that first seated AlphaTauri, because we also don't know the guarantees for Yuki staying there for next year. So it's where the
No.
headache really starts to manifest itself.
Yeah, and the headache just continually gets worse and worse. I think I need some ibuprofen the more we continue with this. But Daniel Ricciardo, yes, it depends when he comes back. You've got Japan and then Qatar. I think I've seen rumours that he might not even be back till Qatar. And then you've got to think, well, he's not going to be straight back on it. I know Lance Stroll had his wrist injury at the start of the year as well. But it'll take a couple of races, I think, to get back up to scratch. And then we're talking Mexico. And then it's pretty much the end of the season. So he'll only have 3 or 4 races to really cement himself in a contention for that drive. And by that time, Sergio Perez might have won a couple of races. He liked Singapore, for example. And if he wins Singapore, they might, you know what, you've won Singapore. You're a competent driver. We're going to keep you for next year. And I, like you said there, me and you have talked several times off the airways, if you like, about how we do not want Daniel Ricciardo to be there next year for a full season. A, because we know he's better than that. Red Bull would bring the best back out in him again. McLaren wasn't really his sort of fits, and I don't know what went wrong there, and I'm still yet to work that out. But Red Bull I think he's hungry for that. And also, he's just
Thinking back to Perez, though, for when he first joined Red Bull, just to potentially throw a spanner in the works for you here, or potentially give you some more food for thought, he won the Bahrain Sakhir Grand Prix in a car that was just about capable of winning a race, and he had a few things come his way, but he also won it from the very back of the grid. Even if Perez wins a Grand Prix or two between now and the end of the season, if Ricciardo can somehow win a Grand Prix in that AlphaTauri, circumstances be damned, then does that guarantee his seat for Red Bull in 2024?
I think the conversation changes completely there, but that is... what have you been drinking, Thiemo, to think that AlphaTauri can win a race this year? I mean,
I didn't say AlphaTauri can win a race. Daniel Ricciardo can win a race.
Well, if he
it just happens to be in an AlphaTauri.
Yeah, well, slightly more believable. I mean, Vettel managed to win a race in a Toro Rosso, and obviously Pierre Gasly in an AlphaTauri as well. But I think this AlphaTauri, as much as we love Daniel Ricciardo, I think we can probably agree on the fact that
Las
it's not going to win.
Vegas Grand Prix, maybe that would be the only one, just because of sheer carnage.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, eh? We never know what's going to happen there. I'll be very surprised to see it, but yeah, I think the conversation will change completely, and it'll give Helmut Marko some nice headaches as well. So we'll send the headache his way, and then he can work that one out. But yeah, if he wins a race with AlphaTauri, I think that conversation changes. But yeah, that's going into fancy land a little bit. But I love your optimism, team. I'm thinking about it now, and that's
focus on Yuki then. If we don't go too far into fancy land there.
Yuki is a good driver, not a great driver, and he's in his 3rd year now. And for me, it's Red Bull or bust, really. There are rumours that he potentially might move to the Honda program at Aston Martin. But then again, it comes down to the whole Stroll thing, which is another kettle of fish from the day. So if he isn't going to move elsewhere, and there isn't many options for him, I'm going to be honest, it's Red Bull or bust. 3rd season with AlphaTauri. Has he impressed too much? Not really. He has a couple of good drives every now and then, but I wouldn't say he outperformed Gasly when Gasly was there. I think Gasly is better than him, and I don't rate Gasly too highly. So yeah, but then again, we've had this conversation before as well. If he performs in the next 7 or 8 races towards the end of the season, then he's in that conversation, and the conversation gets even harder. But it all comes down to whether he stays there another year. But then again, what does that do for him either? I guess if he has a good year next year and Perez is out by the end of 24, next year is a very key and crucial year for him. But it all depends. Not really. And I don't think if he managed to make it to Red Bull, he's going to challenge Max. I think Daniel is the best person to do that, although I don't think he'll do it regularly, sadly to say.
Potentially more regularly than Perez, though.
Oh, yeah, more regularly than Perez. I think that he'll provide, because Perez doesn't really provide headache. If you take Perez's wins from this season, Max had an issue. I think Baku, he provided a headache, but Saudi Arabia, Max had an engine issue in Q1, put to the back of the grid, and then he came through to P2 and sort of didn't need to push for P1. So he doesn't really provide a headache. Ricciardo will provide a headache some weekends, I think that's for sure. Whether it will get to sort of Baku 2018 level headaches where they're crashing into each other, I don't know. But there will be food for thought for Max there. I think over the course of the 24 races, Max will win the championship if that car is good enough. But yeah, Yuki, it's hard to say whether he'll do better than Perez or not. And if he does better than Perez, that might be just an extra win. I can't see him putting, and to challenge Max, you need 7 or 8 wins, really, to be honest. And I don't see Yuki doing that. So that's where I stand.
If we assume that Max and Perez stay for 24, or that if Perez doesn't, it's going to be Ricciardo going there, and Yuki's biding his time for hopefully a fourth year for a shot at 25, then that second seat is where things do get even more complicated, as we've been hinting at there, because you've got Liam Lawson, but we've also got 6 drivers potentially up for that seat for next year. Some more likely than others, but all realistically, because of how Red Bull and Helmut and AlphaTauri work, could be in with a chance of it. Because you have that many of them in Formula 2. You've got Jack Crawford, who's P13 in F2 this year in his rookie season. You've got Enzo Fittipaldi in his second season of F2 in P7. You've got Isaac Hadjar, another rookie in P14. You've got Dennis Hauger, which there's going to be a lot talking about him in a minute, I feel like, in P8 with his second season in Formula 2 this year. And obviously you've got Iwasa in P3, also in his second season, and Zane Maloney in P10, who is another rookie. Now, for the sake of ease and convenience, maybe, I'm going to suggest we take Crawford, Hadjar, and Maloney out of it because they're rookies, and it would take quite a dramatic turn of events next year for any of them to end up in the car outside of a free practice session. But that does still leave us with Fittipaldi, Hauger, and Iwasa, which I'd say it's Iwasa, Fittipaldi, Hauger, weirdly, in the order that you'd probably put them in that second seat. But that is also assuming that Liam Lawson doesn't get that second seat next year and that Daniel Ricciardo isn't in that second seat next year. So what do we do with these 3 drivers, and do they all go into a third season of Formula 2 instead? And if they do, what do we actually gain by doing that? Or do they go elsewhere? I know there's a lot there for you, but I'm going to be mean and just launch it all at you.
Well, if the previous conversation was a starter, this is certainly my pub main course. There is a lot of meat on this bone. But like you say, it all depends what we do with Lawson and sort of Tsunoda and Ricciardo, really. I'm pretty sure for next year, at the very least, that Perez will still be in that seat. And I think that they will go with Ricciardo, and I think they'll just stick with Tsunoda for a fourth year. But those other drivers you mentioned there, Iwasa, do you know what? I think Iwasa's a very good driver, actually. I remember having a conversation with Thiemo last year. I think it might have been in Bahrain 2022 when he made those tires last, for Seymour, what seemed like ever. He's a very competent driver. He's in his second season. He's third place in the championship. At some points, it looks like he could win the championship. So I certainly see potential for him there. Red Bull are moving away from the Honda program, so they're cutting ties with them. So maybe it's less pressing that they put him in. I thought that maybe if they continue with Honda, that they might go with another Japanese driver, certainly for AlphaTauri, but I don't think that's so much of an issue anymore. Hauger's a big conversation for me, and I remember saying in 2021, I made a massive prediction on Twitter about him. I absolutely ranted and raved about him, I think, in that F3 season, saying that by 2024, he will be in an F1 seat. And a few people agree with me. That was a bold prediction. I certainly thought by 25 we'd be seeing him. But I thought this guy.
Are you trying to change the parameters of that deal now by giving yourself an extra year for 25?
I didn't. I stuck an asterisk on that post, I think. I can easily edit things on social media these days. I did say 2024. But, you got to make big and bold predictions in this world. I thought he was the next big thing, certainly for AlphaTauri. He commanded that F3 championship. Last year, I can't even remember where he finished in the championship, to be honest. It was around, was it top 10, was it? I can't remember.
He was in top 10, but he was virtually kind of not unnoticeable, but he had moments such as in Baku, I think, last year, but there was never any moment where you thought, oh, he's arrived. He never had his Oscar Piastri moment or kind of a Teo Porcher moment or anything like this. And it was a bit of a big swing away from the sheer domination that he had in Formula 3 to he's in Formula 2 now. And, it's actually a bit tricky now that he's there. It's a bigger step up than a lot of people might think. It's not just a small jump from F3 to F2. There is a good bit more to it.
I remember coming away from last season thinking, I'm not disappointed with him, but I expected more. But then again, it was a very competitive championship last year. I thought he'd be around the top 5, maybe at the halfway stage around the summer break, thinking, maybe this guy could push towards the championship. Should we get a crazy finish? But I thought by that point, maybe it's better for him if he stays in F2 for another year. Seats will become available, certainly at AlphaTauri, as we thought at the time. But this year, he's been very disappointing. P8 doesn't really do a lot for me, doesn't do a lot for AlphaTauri, doesn't do a lot for him. he'll be in the third season, I guess, next year. But there's other drivers jumping the queue because all these drivers that we mentioned previously, like Crawford, for example, Maloney coming through, he's not had a bad season in P10. There will be further ahead of him in the queue. So by this stage next year, he'll be towards the back of the queue. So to be honest, I can't see him ever entering AlphaTauri unless he wins the championship next year, which is again a big if. So I don't see him going anywhere. Fittipaldi has got the name attached to him. P7 the championship this year. His win in Spa was absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed that. He's a good driver. He's good on his tyres. He's good at overtaking. He's a solid driver, but then, like we say again, there's 4 seats and a multitude of drivers here. I think there are slightly better drivers than him. So I think he'll just miss out because of that. Maybe he'll go to Formula E, for example. I could see him having a great career actually in IndyCar. I don't know about you, Thiemo, but I think if he's suited well there. But
I'll tell you what, then, of these 6 drivers, then, not necessarily for next year, because we've figured that we need something rather dramatic to happen for Hauger to be in AlphaTauri, for example. But to get into AlphaTauri between now and let's include 2026, which of these 6 do you think could actually do it?
So I'm guessing we're not including Lawson in this, no?
No, Lawson's we're going to have to figure him out later. I think he's his own category, which is a good thing in some ways. But yeah, well, Crawford, Fittipaldi, Hadjar, Hauger, Iwasa, and Maloney. Which of those are all of them going to get it to AlphaTauri at some point? And we've already seen 4 drivers at the team this year. It is very doable, but who are we gonna have?
I'm going to go on the premise that we only see them. So if we do see them, for example, as a sort of substitute driver, I'm not going to count that if someone gets injured. So who's going to make it there full time? Maximum, I'd say 2 out of the 6, and that comes down to not necessarily the talent I'm looking at, but just logistics. Iwasa has an okay chance, but maybe the chance is dwindling if he doesn't have a great third season. So the pressure's really on him. Same with Hauger. Hadjar, I really like the look of, especially in F3 last year. P14, he's a rookie. We've seen plenty of drivers over the years that, don't have a great first season, have a fantastic second season. So there's potential there. I really like Zane Maloney. I think he's a very good driver. He had a decent Zandvoort, for example. He's got some decent podiums this year. I think he's got a lot of potential behind him. So I can definitely see something there. And Crawford seemed to, as the season's gone on, got better as well. But you're going to press me for an answer. So I'm going to say out of those drivers, I'm going to say the most likely answer is those who are rookies and not in their second season because the pressure's really on them. So I'm going to say the most likely option is, do you know what? I'd like to see Maloney in AlphaTauri at some point.
I could see that. I could potentially see, again, we like a ballsy prediction. Let's go for AlphaTauri being Iwasa and Maloney in 2025.
AlphaTauri and Iwasa. Yes, that would be very nice, actually. That would be a very good team.
Iwasa could then win his 3rd season next year in F2. Maloney gives him a run for his money, maybe a top 5 finish overall. And at that point, Yuki's either moved up or he decided he's going to jump ship to Aston Martin and wait out there for some time. And Lawson is elsewhere, and Ricciardo is at Red Bull, potentially just for the sake of explaining where everyone's going for this to clear the path for these 2. And I think it'd be nice to have 2 rookies in that team, and just so I don't know the last time we've had 2 rookies in that team. It's been a while.
Ooh, now you're testing me. Let me clear my mind for a second. The last time we had 2 rookies in that team would have been 2015. Who did they have in 2015? Max Verstappen was a rookie, and they had Carlos Sainz. Yeah, 2015.
So, be 10 years. There's a nice symmetry to it. I often kept myself there. We can move on. So, Sebastian Montoya then is the first on the list for Formula 3 drivers that we have in the Red Bull Junior Academy. It's his first full season of F3. He was in there briefly last year for a couple of rounds, and he's currently P16 with 37 points, which is a surprising say currently P16. He is P16. We've had the Formula 3 Championship. It's finished now. It was kind of lower down this order than you'd think, because he seems to have been up there quite a bit, but I think maybe he's just been fighting up there a lot, but hasn't then translated that through to results, which has been interesting. And then we've also got the very new addition to the Red Bull Junior Academy, which is Pepe Marti, who P5 from the end of the season, 105 points, and that's in his second season of F3. which I'm glad he stuck for a second season. There was a lot of talk that we had last year about the drivers making the jump up from F3 to F2 that we thought a bit too soon. Yes, you were fighting for the championship, but I don't know if that's going to be the best thing for you. So I'm glad that even though he wasn't necessarily part of that group, that he stayed and he decided to hone his craft a bit more there, and it seems to have worked out for him. So potentially he's moving up to Formula 2 next year. Montoya staying around in F3, but their potential chances in their roles in the future for Red Bull.
I'd imagine that Montoya sticks around F3. And yeah, it's crazy to think. I remember trying to cast my mind back to all the races. I seem to remember him, certainly Austria as an example. He was always sort of up there, but he had a few incidents. And with the season being condensed, there's not actually that many Formula 3 rounds. So if you have a couple of bad weekends, if you have one bad qualifying, you're not 20th on the grid. We've seen in F1, for example, even F2, that you can come through the field. If you have a bad qualifying or have an engine problem or whatever else, you're at the back of the grid in 30th place. You have to make 10 more overtakes even to get 10 places away from the points. So I'd say he had a promising, speedy, but slightly messy season. And I don't think he'll be happy with P16. Obviously, he comes with that Poison Chalice, really, which is a famous surname, obviously the son of Juan
Yeah, I think
Pablo.
that's why we've heard a lot about him as well. It's just because everyone in South America is getting quite thin arms about the fact that, we've potentially got a driver that could make it to F1. He's in F3. Let's really get behind him. And it's great for that support side of things, but it seems like there's more noise, more smoke than fire necessarily. But it's kind of maybe also too soon to tell on that front, because there is a good driver in there, but does need a good bit of refining still, I think.
Yeah, I think he needs to hone his racecraft a little bit and realise that, you don't have to go for the overtake straight away. But that comes, we've seen F1 drivers do that. So I think he needs to go away, have a good off season, learn a few tips from Dad. His dad was certainly very quick. So if he has half the pace his dad has, then he'll do very well, I think. But yeah, he won't be happy with 16th place, but I don't think we're going to judge him on his first full season of F3. But this time next year, if he's languishing towards that position as well, then there won't be a future for him, I don't think. And I'm really happy with Pepe Marti, actually. I think he's sort of done the same thing that Logan Sargent did, and sort of stuck around in F3. He could have moved to F2 after nearly winning the championship. Not that Pepe Marti nearly won it last year, but I think there was a case to be made that you can stick around in F3, hone your skills a little bit more. And I think we'll see Pepe Marti in F2 next year as well. And by doing so, like you say, he's managed to make his way into the F3, the Red Bull program, sorry. So we'll see him in F2 next year, but then again, he'll join all that conversation, the six above him. So it's going to be a very, very competitive season next year. And I think we're going to see a full grid of Red Bull liveried cars. It'll be like Red Bull Formula next year. But as long as the racing...
Yeah, don't give them ideas.
Oh, well, they're the ones picking the drivers, not us.
I do think it'd be interesting if he does stick with Campos as well for Formula 2 next year, because then that means that Campos do have a decision to make driver-wise. Do you stick with Ralph Boschung, who has been there for God knows how many years now, but doesn't seem to be getting any further? Or do you stick with someone who has delivered a lot more than anyone perhaps was expecting with Kushmaini, who has been just a real kind of revelation in Formula 2 this year after a very forgettable performance in Formula 3 last year?
Boschung would go, I think. He's been there, I remember him, 2017, 18? He's been there an absolutely, he's been there ages. I think he did well, but didn't he win a race? Didn't he?
He won a race at the start of the year. Season? Yeah.
I seem to remember him being sort of up there, and then he sort of ended up nowhere. But Kushmaini is an absolute revelation. I do like Kushmaini. Last year he was nowhere, but this year he's certainly really improved, and it's nice seeing an Indian driver doing well. I love it when we get drivers from new parts of the world who can potentially enhance motorsport, in reputation over in parts like India. I'd love to see a Grand Prix back there, as we've had on previous editions of this series. So I think they would get rid of Boschung. I'm pretty sure of that.
Two more drivers. Don't worry, it's the last two drivers on the list that we're going to just briefly mention, because there's not an awful lot to them, and they are the youngest ones on the list, still on Red Bull's site for being in their academy. You've got Suter Arrow, who's in the Junior Formula Series. He came third in French F4 last year, currently P22 in GB3 this year with 73 points and a best finish of 6th. And then you've got Arvid Lindboud, who there's not really much on him. He's in a Formula 4, but it's tricky to find too much on him without digging a lot more deeper, which I just didn't have time for because of this and because of the sheer number of other juniors in here. I don't imagine you'll have a lot to say on them, but it's interesting to be interesting to see where they end up. More so Arrow maybe, because GB3 we've seen some drivers from there come into F3 this year just for around here or there to see what it's like for them.
Didn't Josh
So
where Josh Mason came from? Did GB3
yeah,
came?
and I think so. And I think Mackenzie Creswell as well, a couple of the
Yeah.
ones that were down at PHM. So it's not out of the realm possibility for next year that he finds his way in there. But you're going to say P22 and GB3 maybe have another year going to a different Formula first, maybe Formula Regional somewhere.
And this is where, you really, for those who watch the feeder series, your knowledge really gets tested, because then you've got to realise, well, third in French Formula 4 is very decent. And then you see 22 in GB3 and think, well, and then you've got to think, well, is GB3 a harder series than Formula 4? I'm not too sure it is. I don't know too much about GB3. I need to do some more research on it. 22nd in any Formula sort of junior championship isn't great, even if you are learning your trade. I think if you're a special or decent driver, you would certainly be towards the top of that, because all the cars are fairly identical between the series, really. I know some series have slightly more power, but the tyre suppliers for ideas of costs and everything else normally are the same within the series. They normally share circuits as well, so you only normally seem to travel to the same sort of 8 or 9 circuits around sort of Europe for, like I say, cost reasons. But I did like a quick Google yesterday, but I didn't find too much more on these drivers, like you say. So yeah, I mean, the proof's in the pudding. In 5 years' time, we might be talking about them as AlphaTauri drivers. Who knows? But I did see a little bit more on Twitter about Arvin Lindblad. I think there's certainly a lot of hype around him. I guess there's a lot of hype around him, seeing him on Twitter. But yeah, it's not too much I found in him either. But Formula 4 is not the easiest championship in the world, so if he does well there, then we might see him in AlphaTauri. But yeah, I've got much more to say on them, to be honest.
Well, then it's probably good that we leave them to the end of this next category, because I'm going to be really mean now to both of us, to be fair, and I'm going to say that we should try and predict where all of these drivers are going to end up, and I'm going to put maybe a 5-year cap on that. So we've got until, let's go for 28 there, the end of Max's contract.
Are we going realistic, or are we going optimistic? Because if we're going
you can do whatever you want. Let's have a bit of a mix. I think that there'll be optimism further down the list because of who some of the drivers are. And I am going to post these as well, so they're going to go on there, and we're going to have a record of that for at some point in the future when we do go back and see how creative we were.
Okay, here we go then. Do you want me to start? Or are you going to kick us off?
Well, I think it's the easiest one to start off with, Max Verstappen. I think, actually, you know what? I'll be ballsy. You can be sensible if you want. I'm going to say he'll get to the end of 26, and then he's going to go off to European Le Mans Series.
I like the sound of that. European Le Mans Series. So what are you saying? He wins all the championships till then, and then he gets bored? Or he just thinks
not necessarily. I'm just saying he stays in there. He'll win at least another championship after this year, but then he'll stay for 26, maybe a bit like Lewis is hopefully planning on doing, just to see what the new regs are like. And then if he wins that, you're like, well, I've got nothing left to prove. I've got 5 titles to say at this point, and I can go off to Elms. Yeah, or he doesn't like it and he buggers off that way.
Bunch of shit. And then he thinks, you know what, I'm done with this.
Where are you putting him?
I want to see him in I want to see him in WEC. I think he might be in WEC.
What year?
In 5 years' time.
WEC in 5 years. Okay.
He'll do WEC in 5 years. So by 2028, he might do his contract. He might, you know what, think, sod this. I've had enough of this. I'm saying WEC.
Well, like you're saying, he's one of 2 drivers who can pretty much dictate when he leaves F1. So if he wants to go early, he will go early.
He can choose whatever he wants to do. I think that was slightly more optimistic than realistic, but I can certainly see him doing it as well. So we'll stick with WEC in 5 years.
We can always blame it on the drink from the pub if it all goes really badly on these predictions.
I've always got that excuse.
Sergio Perez, then, what are you doing with him?
With Perez, I am Perez. He won't be an F1 in 5 years' time. He will be. I think he might take a sabbatical. I know he's got a young family now, and then he will. Do you know? I can see him doing a rogue stint in IndyCar. Maybe not even that. He will do the odd Indy 500, like one of the sort of celebrity, not celebrity drivers, but like Tony Kanaan, I think comes back, doesn't he? And
yeah,
and that's Takuma Sato, I think, that sort of thing. And
so
Alonso
is he staying out his contract and he's going to be there next year and then goes off into his IndyCar sunset?
2024, he leaves F1. He spends a year with his family. He'll come back to the paddock every now and then, make an appearance. He'll wave the flag at the Mexican Grand Prix, and then he will do an IndyCar stint at some point.
Yeah. Only because I'm far too optimistic, I'm going to say he's out of Red Bull at the end of this year, and he's going to join IndyCar for next year. Why not? IndyCar 2024, and that's going to age terribly immediately, but we're going to have fun with it. Daniel Ricciardo then is the tricky thing there. Well, by my own logic, he's got to be in F1 in 2024. But it's just which team is he in? Let's say Red Bull. At Red Bull. Let's just have someone be optimistic about it, because I feel like you're going to be more realistic here.
Yeah, I'm normally the more realistic one. I'd love to see that. Do I see it happening? I'm not sure. He will be in AlphaTauri next year again, and then you got Red Bull looking at Lando Norris, but then again, that's another conversation.
What do you think of that? I'm going to also say F1 in 2024 Red Bull and wins 2026 title. There we go. Wow. Let's make that even more juicy.
You've sounds like you've made use of the pub happy hour there, because that is a ballsy prediction, but I'm on board with it.
A couple of years to get that going again, and that's why Max leaves at the end of 26 to go off to Elms, because he doesn't like that Daniel beat him under the new rules. There's a logic to it.
There we go. AlphaTauri in 24. I'm going to say talk show in 25 in America with James Corden.
Talk show in 2025.
I mean, I know you'd love to watch that, Thiemo, but yeah, I guess that's slightly disappointing.
There's no reason he couldn't do both in theory. So, there's room for this to still happen. Yuki Tsunoda then. Now things are going to get properly tricky. I feel like these next two drivers in particular are the trickiest ones to put down. I don't know what to do with Yuki, because on the one hand, there's that 4th year in AlphaTauri next year, but then where does he go after that?
2024, he stays. 2025, he loves Vegas so much that he says, I'm going back to Vegas, but I'm not going to be racing there. I'm going to open a restaurant, and then I could see him doing, do you know what? I can see him joining Toyota in WEC.
What a random course of events there, but I love it. Open restaurant in Las Vegas.
Or maybe WEC, then restaurant. I don't know, but he does want
and joins WEC with Toyota. We're just going to, so we've got a 5-year cap on it. It works. So if that's what you're going for Yuki, I'm going to say he's also AlphaTauri for next year, but then joins Aston Martin, but not necessarily in that second seat, and he's looking to get in 2026, maybe with an eye on 2026.
Yeah, I could certainly
by that point.
I can certainly see that, actually. Depending on what happens with Stroll, of course, you could potentially think that the Drugovich will get slightly bored being in that seat. That there's links for Formula E next year. Not sure if he's signed that deal yet, but maybe he could be like a reserve driver for a year at Aston Martin potentially. But yeah, I could certainly see him doing something like that.
Liam Lawson, then I've got a slightly left field thing here, because I think that he will get fed up with AlphaTauri and Red Bull not giving him the opportunity he deserves. So, assuming no other city business for next year on the F1 grid, I'm going to say he joins Williams for 2025.
Yep, I can certainly see that happening. With Albon sticking around there, would you say?
Yeah, Lawson and Albon 25, because that feels like a solid. Get Lawson embedded into the team, and then 26 they can really capitalise on the new regulations, and they'll go for it.
Yeah, I love the sound of that. Yeah, I can see Lawson there. I'm going to say Lawson. So do you know what? He could even win Super Formula this year. There's only 8 points behind. I think next year we'll see him in a reserve AlphaTauri role, depending. It might be the case of they get bored with Yuki and then they put him in halfway through the season. But it's one of these things where you've got to look where you put before, because each drive will have an effect on the other, because there's only so many seats.
Yeah. Does he go to IndyCar maybe for you then? If he's a reserve role, does he stay around? Because obviously looking at the next 5 years, I'm kind of just having a placement for a lot of these, and then we'll go off. You've really got some thought out plans there. I mean, if you look at Yuki, you've got next year sorted, 25 deals with the restaurant, WEC for 26. You've got a bit of a plan there. So how long is he going to be in reserve?
Yeah, so my plan for Yuki could span 40 years. Lawson will, competent driver. It will come down again to the amount of seats in F1, I think, because he's had those Red Bull tyres for so long, and the other academies are sort of tightening their belt a bit and being a bit more strict on who they sort of put in the seats, I guess. I can't really see him moving to another affiliated team or a bigger team. Yeah, I think I can just see an IndyCar career for him, to be honest.
Now we're going to get even trickier, which I know I keep saying it, but it's happening. Jack Crawford, where does he go? He's in a rookie season F2 this year, second season next year. I could see him being a 3-season driver, so 2025. So he's got a shot then at AlphaTauri for 26, maybe. But I'm going to say he doesn't make it to AlphaTauri, and I'm going to say he goes to Formula E in 2026.
Formula E in 2026. I like the sound of that. Jack Crawford, I'm saying he impresses. And do you know what? I'm going to go a bit left field here, even if it doesn't match up with my other plans. I'm saying that I'm being all positive here. We get a new American team on the grid in Andretti. He's an American driver.
Right.
Logan Sargent potentially hasn't cut the mustard in 5 years' time. They put him in as a new rookie sort of American driver. He sort of proved himself in F2 in 2024 and 25. He's won races. He might have got, close to the championship. And we see him in Andretti F1.
Andretti in 2026 as well, yeah?
Yeah, we'll go with 26.
Cool.
26, maybe. Yeah, 26. We'll go with 26.
Yeah. Fittipaldi then is another tricky driver there. I could see that being IndyCar maybe, but also I think you might want that. So I'll say Haas reserve for 25. Because Fittipaldi seemed to go there.
That seems like the logical choice, doesn't it?
I just wanted to give you the IndyCar option because you quite liked the sound of that earlier when we were discussing.
Yeah, I will take I'll go with my previous thing and say he's an IndyCar driver. Yeah, he seems IndyCar driver.
Got a year on that. When's he going to go in there?
So it'll be now. So his second year, I think he'll do another year of F3 next year in 24, 25. He'll be out there. You're saying reserve driver. I'm saying. He could be IndyCar 25. Why not? They don't mind putting in raw talent in IndyCar. So 25 for him.
Isaac Hadjar, then you've got a bit of a soft spot for him. I think he needs a bit more rounding out, but let's see if we can have a really difference of opinion here.
Do you know, I'm going to stick with what I originally said. I do need to see more from him. I did like what I see in his early days. I think he's got raw talent there. He's certainly a hungry driver. He's not complete, but then again, a lot of these drivers on this list aren't. AlphaTauri for 2020, 2025, 25, 26, I think. 25 will be more logical, wouldn't it? I think.
Don't let logic get in the way. Isaac Hadjar, it's tricky. So his first season, second season next year, third season, I could see that happening. I'm going to say he's going to be going down a similar route to Liam Lawson. So he's going to be in Super Formula in 2026. And after having a third season at Formula 2 in 2025. And he's just waiting around, hoping and biding his time that he can do something. And maybe he gets into AlphaTauri for 27.
Yeah, well, I like the sound of that. Now, this is probably arguably, Thiemo, the trickiest one of the lot, I'd say.
Yeah, I really don't know what to do with Dennis Hauger, which it sounds really bad because he is a good driver, but he's just not been able to follow through so much on the early promise. So this is very tricky, and I don't know if you've got something you already want to say for this while I try and think of what I'm going to do with him, or if you're hoping that I'm going to go first and so you can have a bit more time for yourself.
I'm hoping you take the lead on this one because I'm stumped by my prediction.
Let's see, second season this year. If he does a third season, that's 25. You know what? I'll say he does also what Hadjar does, 26. He's not 25. He's in Super Formula, so I'm going to say AlphaTauri for 2026, and hopefully that doesn't mess up too much of what I've been saying earlier for other drivers. But also, we could have a season like this year, and there's just a few drivers in AlphaTauri in 2026, and that's how I get around this.
There we go. Do you know what I'd absolutely love to see it? My prediction would become sort of half true there with the 2026.
Yeah, it's just a couple of years down the line. But you know what? It's for motorsport. As long as they get into the right team eventually, to what you said, it
Yeah, no
counts.
one will remember what year I said. Dennis Hauger will might have to go against you and sort of backtrack on my prediction a bit. We make ballsy predictions and sometimes they don't come off. Dennis Hauger will be, I can see him sort of floating around the endurance car scene. Maybe not in one of the top cars in the Hyperclass series, but maybe LMP1, LMP2. I don't know. Maybe that's doing him a disservice a bit. There's also the IndyCar route, which is, as we say every year, is becoming more and more of an attractive proposition, given how that series has sort of taken off. And its popularity is only growing. So F1 isn't the be-all and end-all like it maybe used to be a few years ago. There's always a Formula E option. I'm just going to sort of, it sounds quite easy to say, it's a bit of a cop-out really, a bit of an easy answer, but I'm going to say he'll end up in Formula E.
Which
by
year?
2020. He'll do another year of Formula 2 next year. He might get an AlphaTauri Reserve 25. So I'm saying, what do I say? 25. I might say I'll say he'll be an IndyCar driver, a Formula E driver in 25, but also he'll be the AlphaTauri Reserve. He'll do sort of like a double act sort of thing.
Sure. Yuma Iwasa then, by contrast, should be easier, and I also don't know what to do because I always like the idea of having Iwasa and Yuki in a Honda team, which then does mean Aston Martin. But if for that to be the two drivers, that means that you got to get rid of Alonso. So that's tricky.
Don't really want to do that right now.
No, which means I have to look really in the future. I mean, he's in his second season now, so third season be next year. Bit of a stint for a couple of years. Maybe Alonso is gone by 26. I don't want him to be gone by 26, but maybe, okay. Aston Martin reserve in 26, and then full seat with Iwasa with Yuki in 2027, and we have that Japanese outfit, but with Aston Martin.
Or, adding on to that, I could see that as a realistic proposition, actually. I could see Honda putting more money into that outfit, and it's sort of becoming a Honda Works team, which I wouldn't. It
does kind of screw over Drugovich a little bit, but we can put him somewhere else another time. He's not in this podcast, so we'll worry about him later.
We'll have to implement another podcast. Screw over these drivers in that podcast.
We've got to balance it out, and hopefully, at least some of the predictions will be right somewhere.
There'll be a prediction right in one of these pub chat episodes somewhere. And if not, then we can just, like you say before, blame it on the alcohol.
Where are you putting Iwasa, though?
Iwasa. I do like Iwasa. This is where I'm going to say he'll be an AlphaTauri driver, and then, I've promised 5 different drivers an AlphaTauri seat in the same year, and we have some contractual disputes, which wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility.
At least we've got something interesting going on for a change in Formula One.
Or they can all fight it out behind the barriers. Who knows?
Been a while.
Yes, something interesting happening in Formula One. That'll be a fine day. Iwasa, would he take the option that, for example, Lawson's done, that Gasly did, for example, and say, do you know what? Super Formula is a competitive championship. It's a championship I could win, potentially dominate. I'll go home for a year and then come back stronger if I don't get the sort of seats required, which sort of gives me a cop out there because, like I say, go to Super Formula and then see what happens in the few years after that. So he'll do a third year of F3 next year, so that's 2024.
So potentially that could be, if he does that 25, he could be an AlphaTauri for 26, and that doesn't contradict anything you've said so far. So that does work.
I'm going to say for 25 because of the sort of blockage on the previous seats, because, like we said, there's not many of them, that he does Super Formula with the option of going to AlphaTauri, but Super Formula is sort of a definite. And then, if their seat becomes available, then why not? I'd love to see him there, but yeah, that's
Zane Maloney then is an interesting one because I could see him being very competitive next year, which obviously gives us headaches, and we can't keep sticking drivers in Formula E or Super Formula just so it helps the rest of our predictions out there.
Maybe we have to go up the list and then delete some drivers' names, then put them in. Who knows?
Yeah, or we just let the fates decide, and we're just like, well, we got one of these right, and we had to be wrong here for that to happen. Otherwise, it wouldn't have worked. But Zane Maloney, if he has a good season next year, I reckon he can finish in the top 5.
Yeah,
that means then 2025. Who have I put in for AlphaTauri for 26? Have I put
You've put in
anyone?
Hauger and one other.
Oh, Helga's the only person I've put in AlphaTauri for 26. I've put other drivers in other teams for 26, but I've not put anyone else in AlphaTauri yet. So we're going to put AlphaTauri 26 for him, and he's a reserve in 25 after, top four next year. Yes, that works. AlphaTauri in 2026 and reserve in 2025. That just about works, and hopefully means that these last few drivers I can balance out with that and it doesn't get too messy.
I think I haven't put in another driver. It seems like I've put about promised 5 drivers a seat, and thank God we.
So you've put Iwasa in for 26, and you've got
And
Helga as a reserve driver for 25, but
Hadjar,
everyone else.
Hadjar for
Hajar's in
25.
25, but he could get kicked out by 26. So depends how nice you want to be to
Right,
Hajar.
here we go. Hadjar does the first half a season, gets or breakers, gets kicked out. Maloney gets put in. There we go.
Replaces Hajar halfway through 25.
I mean, no Red Bull these days. It doesn't even have to be halfway through the season. So
Oh no, but I
round
was just being generous. I did find an article the other day about the Red Bull drivers that I'd written earlier in the year, and thinking and it's more or less a quote verbatim of in the unlikely event that De Vries gets dropped after a full season with AlphaTauri. Thought that's not aged well at all.
no, it didn't age well at all, did it? Montoya.
In Montoya.
Now,
I want him to be in Formula One just for the purpose of I want to see South America get back into F1 a bit more. There's some really positive noise down there, and if they can sort some of their stuff out just economically and organizationally, there's a really good market for it there. And
there is
Montoya
very.
could help open that up. And so if I put him in IndyCar like I want to, it doesn't work. But then
No.
I don't know where I'd put him. Maybe I mean, if he's in Formula 3 now,
So,
he has another season there, couple of seasons, he'd be in 27, maybe at the earliest for F1, which does help on a couple of my
he's going
other
to be
things.
27. I'm going to say, I'm going to jump in, Timo, because I don't want to lose
Go
the
for
idea
it.
in my head. I'm going to say 27. He is reserve AlphaTauri, and then 28. By that point there'll be some movement in the team. Max Verstappen could have bugged off by then. Then one of the drivers we mentioned there could have potentially moved up to Red Bull. So that seems realistic, I think, providing he sort of spends time in F2, which I don't think he'll race through the series. I don't think he's that good. He's good, but I don't think he's going to race through like we've seen with. He's not going to do a Piastri, for example. I don't think.
I'm going to
So
say
yeah, I
then
think by
that he
28 we can see
stays
him in F1.
with the Red Bull Junior Academy for a while, but then for 2027, there's nothing going on in the F1 scene, and by that point, you've had a few years for a couple of the other drivers. So I'm going to go back to my other kind of team that I'm bringing in for this. I'm going to say that he joins Williams in 2027, and I'm going to leave it as
That'd be a
vague
nice.
as that because I don't know if I'm going to have him as a driver or as a reserve driver, but he's going to join Williams with the eye of becoming a driver at least there, which I think. Yeah, Liam Lawson joins 25. He's had a couple of years there. Maybe Albon leaves, go to a top team, or just leaves, or Lawson leaves and he goes to a top team. So there's that space there, and no one from their junior academy has done enough, so they put Montoya in.
And then it sort of completes a nice round story because that's where his dad started in F1. So that's a
Exactly.
nice little story, Timo. I love that. Pepe Marti, he will. Good driver. I'm glad he got invited into the program, but I don't see him lasting that long in the program simply because I think they've put a lot of eggs into the previous baskets above. They are looking to cut back the academy from what I read. I certainly think since
They're going to
Matashit's
need to
sadly
with the
passed
amount of
away, that they're
drivers
going to
they've got
reduce
in
some.
it.
Yeah, it's ever expanding, isn't it? Like my bar bill at this pub, ever growing. Pepe Marti I think it will get dropped by the program, not sort of acrimoniously, sort of just, thanks for your service. We haven't really got the room for you. He might get picked up by somewhere else. It will do F2 for a couple of seasons, and then by 2026, I think it'll just go and race sports cars or something like that.
Cars in 2026. I'm going to say he's going to be an IndyCar by 2026. I
Yeah,
think
there's
he's going
certainly.
to, with an eye of coming back potentially into F1, but it's going to be an IndyCar for now. I think we're going to leave that.
IndyCar for now. And now we get to the this is where
Yeah,
it
this
becomes
is kind of
really
you can be as ambitious as you want here because there's not much to go on, and they're still pretty young in the grand scheme of things. So if we're thinking for Arrow, he's GB3 now. Let's assume he gets into F3, couple of seasons there, couple of seasons in
certainly doable.
F2, then he could be in F1 in 2028, maybe. Um, but again, that would be as an Alpha Tauri driver, and I don't have an Alpha 2028 there yet, so that kind of works. I'm not gonna say he's gonna be a reserve driver for Alpha Tauri in 2028, or Super Four, or yeah, or Super Formula because Japanese.
Yeah.
There you go.
I suppose like we could put anything down here, it can't be right for now because we literally have no idea. 5 years time, he could sort of still be an F2, really. I don't know. I don't
Oh
actually know
yeah.
his age. How old? Do you know how old is he? I think he's 16, is he?
Well, it's fairly
Mm.
young. It's just I keep thinking. I mean, that's something we'll talk about in a minute. The age factor of all of these drivers, but I think that yeah, he's young for a reason. So that if they want to catapult him up, they can. But I don't see it happening with all these other drivers in there, even if
No.
they do trim down the
Um,
order slightly.
he's in GB3 now. He could realistically then go to sort of Formula Regional, sort of Fracas next year, maybe spend a year there. I don't think he's sort of near the top of the junior motorsport pyramid yet. He could still realistically, in 5 years' time, be an F2. So I'm going to say in 5 years' time, he's in F2 because he could still be in his third year then by that point easily. So yeah, I'm going to say he'll be in Formula 2.
Fair enough. And then potentially the trickiest one of all, because we know bugger all about this person, Arvid Lindbergh. What do we do with him? Any ideas?
Uh, um, can I say Formula 2 again?
Sure, sure. Why not? So in Formula Two in the next 5 years,
He'll be somewhere in Formula 2 racing a Red Bull livery car on some track somewhere.
suitably vague. I'm going to. I'm going to say he defects to another driver academy, and I have no idea after that. So that gets
Lovely.
me after that.
We needed a bit of
Defects to another
controversy
driver
here.
academy. Yeah.
So, yeah. Joins the rivals. Love it.
But that does bring up an interesting question that you were just kind of raising there about the age of those in particular. Is age a factor with all of these drivers? In particular, are Red Bull looking for their next Verstappen? Because you can see that present in other driver academies, but they want to rush through drivers such as
Yeah.
Kimi Antonelli. They're looking at potentially putting him up into Formula 2 for next year and just skipping Formula 3 altogether,
Ooh, it's a big
depending on how
move.
his season goes. But it seems it seems like they're all rushing too much and they all want to have the next Verstappen, but is that a good thing?
I'd say it's not a good thing. And realistically, as much as Verstappen might have bored you this season, he is sort of once in a generational talent, such as Hamilton. By doing the next Verstappen, you've essentially got to be Verstappen. I don't think any of these drivers are necessarily. Verstappen did something that is, really quite impressive. Actually, he came through the I can't remember. I don't even know. It's one of the real junior championships. Then got 2014. He got the AlphaTauri sort of testing drive, which Toro Rosso back then. He did one FP1 session. I think it was in Brazil. I think maybe two somewhere else. And by 2015, he was a full fledgling sort of rookie F1 driver in Toro Rosso. By 2016, he was winning Grand Prix, and here we are now. It's he's a multi-time world champion. He was only 17, 16 at the time. And I think the rules might have changed. Like, this is where my knowledge is getting severely tested. Don't you need to be 18 now for a super
Yeah, you've got to
license?
be
And
a
if that,
minimum age to get in there. You can't just be putting any old person you can't stick a
so it
12-year-old
does
in Formula One
change
anymore.
this slightly, which to me says, well, if you're going to be 18, you can be sort of a junior age, such as 16 in the Formula 3 and Formula 2, which I guess is their way of saying, well, actually, we want you to go through these series to really hone your craft. And also, the other big factor of this is obviously they will supposedly improve as they go through the series. Max proved you didn't need to do it, which is a bit weird, but he proved
And you
it.
have some drivers, like I mentioned earlier, Kushmani, they're terrible in Formula 3, but then Formula 2, they really come alive. So it's
Yeah,
Do we,
and I think
and then the
they
reserve for
are
that was
they are
Dennis Helger, kind of in a way
effectively.
where he's not been terrible in Formula 2, but he's not been anywhere near as good as he was in Formula
Yeah,
3, and
it
it
does
kind of does
flip
mess
on
things
its.
up on that bit.
Mm. It does really change. The cars are actually, believe it or not, quite different between Formula 3 and Formula 2. Formula 2 cars are not really like F1 cars, but they're certainly more representative than the F3 cars, certainly a lot more powerful. The engines are different. The tyres are, I think, different as well. F2 tyres are more reminiscent of F1 tyres. But also, I think not only does it prove that they can sort of prove like create a testing ground for them and say, right, this driver can sort of improve their skills and we can see what they can do. It also means that by spending more years in these junior formulas, they are waiting for seats to come around because, as we know, Thiemo, they're an absolute premium. So age will become a factor for these drivers, but also get to the point whereby some of these drivers on this list, well, you're 22, 23 now. You're in our driver academy and you've been overtaken by the 18-year-old hotshot. You have your prime, and Hauger had his moment in the sun, and as we know with these sort of driver programs, once your moment in the sun's over and the clouds start appearing overhead, then your time's sort of up. So you got
Especially
to
if you look at the
strike
list
while
of
the iron's
Formula
hot.
3 champions from the last 10, 15 years or so, and you see where they are now, and a good few of them aren't anywhere near Formula 1, and you think it's really interesting to see how even winning a big championship like that guarantees you virtually nothing.
Yeah, we've seen, I think, a couple of names off my head. Fabio Lima won the 2012 championship. So I think Raquelme won a championship as
So
well.
Jack Aitken was in the
Jack Aitken
Giovinazzi.
was in there. Giovinazzi sort of got to F1 but never did anything. Julian Palmer stuck around for a maximum amount of time of the year. Although he is a great pundit on F1 TV, I must say he's really found his craft there. But yeah, there's no guarantee that even if you win these championships, you make it. A lot of it comes down to politics as well.
Well, that kind of
yeah,
leads into the next bit a bit as well there, because I'm saying of the influence of other driver academies. Mercedes, Ferrari, Sauber, Alpine, and Williams all have them. Aston Martin, McLaren kind of have them and looking to develop them more. We've just made a very kind of thought through list, roughly speaking, of where we think all of the drivers are going to end up. But could any of them get poached by any of these other teams? And if so, how does that change anything? And if any of them did get poached, who do you think would get poached?
we certainly have seen poaching happen before. Some driver academies like poaching more than others. I'm trying to think of examples actually off my head team here of who's sort of been poached or then moved to a senior team that they weren't with that junior program with. But
Kind of
it's
just got the
certainly,
main one of Oscar Piastri there with Alpine and then McLaren.
of course, yeah, Oscar Piastri. I can't forget that. Yeah, Oscar Piastri obviously nurtured by Alpine, then moved to McLaren. There's a few drivers on there. I guess Montoya maybe just for the simple fact that he's got his dad in play there in the paddock. He's had
See him going
relations
to
with.
McLaren, maybe.
Yeah, he'll have contact. I'm sure. F1 moves on. Greatly throughout time. It's a technological sport, but there's still people in the paddock from 30 years ago that are still sniffing around. He will have contacts at McLaren. I'm sure he'll still have older mechanics and older team personnel at Williams. I'm sure he has power within the paddock. He's a well-known face, so maybe potentially there. Looking up the list, Iwasa, because he's got the Japanese links. Honda will be, I'm sure, wanting some Japanese sort of interest for 2026 if they want
I
to
tell
put
you
more
what,
money
then
into
I'm
that
going to
program.
just put a little caveat next to Montoya and say joins Williams / McLaren in 2027 because of
Yeah,
that.
go
Because
for it.
Juan Pablo did race for them in IndyCar as well, so there is that extra little bit of relationship there. So maybe, and that would be an interesting thing. Lando goes elsewhere. Piastri's leading that team. Piastri and Montoya be an interesting lineup for 27.
I would absolutely love that. Lawson actually might be another one as well that might get poached. You think back to Nick De Vries, for example. He was a Mercedes junior. One of their few juniors, actually. They don't actually normally have many juniors, but he was one of their sort of touted drivers. And then Red Bull picked him up, which is a very odd move for Red Bull. Something we haven't really mentioned in this pub chat yet is that they seem to have slowed up a little bit on their uptake of the junior drivers into AlphaTauri. I think we look back to years ago, we saw Bourdais, we saw John-Eric Verne, we saw Sebastian
Buemi.
Buemi, we saw Hartley, who was a bit older when he joined, but he was always sort of part of the Red Bull sort of sports car program. He sort of had sponsorship through that. There are other drivers as well that I've forgotten about. Scott Speed was one of the first ones back in 2007. The Red Bull American sponsorship when Red Bull was trying to sort of break into the American drinks market there. So it can be done, but they do seem to have stagnated. Now AlphaTauri has sort of gone from this young upstarts, kind of wacky, let's get these drivers in there, let's experiment, to a team that sort of stagnated a bit as well. We know that they're changing name next year to potentially Hugo Boss Racing, which is another point for another day. But it'd be interesting to see how they sort of carry forward, and whether any of these drivers, like you say, with the stagnation, the team think, actually, do you know what? Although it might not be possible because of politics within the paddock, I'm going to start knocking doors elsewhere.
The last spanner to throw in the works here, then, as well, is that even with 15 drivers, if we include the drivers that are racing for them currently in their arsenal and the influence of other driver academies, there's also a lot more women going into motorsport. And looking to the future, who should they sign? You've got F1 Academy's influence here, and you've got drivers there already signed up by driver academies. You look at Abby Pulling, she's with Alpine. You've got Lena Bühler in Sauber. You've got the introduction of F1 teams each having a driver in F1 Academy next year, which essentially means 2 for Red Bull because of Red Bull and AlphaTauri. So of the 13 drivers, shall we say, could maybe take a couple off there if we assume Marta Garcia, and who's in second place at the moment, one of the Corbasis, I think. Hamda, I think, or Lena, actually. If we take those 3 out of the equation, we've got 10 or 11 drivers potentially up for grabs. Who would they maybe take? And if they did take any of them, is that a good or a bad thing for those drivers, considering how many of just the sheer number of drivers in the driver academy already?
Well, it's a stacked academy, isn't it? And as we know, F1 Academy sort of incorporates the Formula One teams next year. If you've listened to any other of our episodes, you might have heard that we had queries about how the teams, or how much of a role the teams would play. Are they there for sponsorship only? Are they going to actually provide these girls with academy places, or are they just there to put a sticker on the car? Or they're going to put money into the teams? We don't know too much about that yet. I certainly think there is scope to pick up one of these young women. There are so many good talents now coming through F1 Academy. There are other academies out there though, and I think that they are in the sort of they have the what's the word I'm looking for? They certainly have the choice, these girls, at the moment, because, like we say, we don't know if they're racing for, let's say, quote unquote, Red Bull in F1 Academy. Is it a Red Bull Academy seat, or is it just that they're sponsored by Red Bull, or is it just a Red Bull car, painted car? We don't know. They can sort of pick and choose, maybe. They can sort of knock on a few of the F1 Academy, the F1 team doors. But if you were going to pick, you were one of these young women, we know, unfortunately, how hard it has been to sort of, number one, get exposure, number two, get sponsorship. W Series collapsed. That didn't help things. The fact that it hasn't been on TV this year, which infuriated me, and I know it has done you as well. That was not the ideal
had to
start
physically go to France to go and watch it. That is the extent to which I had to do that, just to go and watch them racing.
And even then, you just had a timing screen, didn't you? And no actual picture.
Yeah, I had to stand on the roof of the hospitality to watch them coming around parts of the track, and then rush to the other side of it to watch a bit more of it.
Wow, it's like going back to the 50s, which is not good at all. If I was going
I'm looking at the list though of the drivers, and I'm just thinking who could maybe go there. I'm thinking on difference of ability that we've seen so far, and also just because, again, it's F1 Academy, it's still pretty foundational-ish if we take it for the abilities and learning the craft and honing it. Maybe Neria Marti gets the Red Bull pick, and then just because of the closeness to Red Bull HQ and everything, maybe Carrie Schreiner goes to the AlphaTauri bit of it, because of the other drivers I just can't see. I think Kramer, that's probably going to be more likely the Haas, Ferrari, Alfa Romeo side of things. You've got, I'm not sure where Mercedes go, but I think the Alcobasis, I don't think they would be with Red Bull. I think they're their own dynasty in a way. So
Alpine would maybe look at Lovin Foss, for example. So maybe not.
Yeah.
Edgar, maybe. I don't know if Edgar's got any links elsewhere. She does have. She did drive for Carl. She's just driving for Carlin this year. I know Carlin has had a link up in the past with Red Bull, so maybe her, for example.
True. And then it goes off against the thing of, if these are the drivers that go up there, or at least have the potential to go further up there, how much of a benefit is it? Or is it just good to get that exposure, and, like you say, they then get poached by another team further down the line, and there's no hard feelings because you helped me get a bit further up the food chain?
I think they're in between a rock and a hard place, really, because getting into an academy is key. We haven't seen, certainly in the modern era, many drivers get into F1 without an academy backing. But at the same time, you go into Red Bull and you kind of just, we put them in their list there now, and there's sort of already 12 drivers ahead of them if you include obviously Verstappen. But there's 12 drivers in that sort of food chain, if you like, and they'd probably rightly or wrongly head towards the back of that queue. But we do need on the sort of women in motorsport side of thing, we do need a pioneer to come in and say, do you know what, women can actually do this, and as we know they can, and change teams' attitudes to finally put them in an F1 test seat, finally put them in an F1 race seat, and then that might change teams' sort of opinion as well. It won't hurt them, but they should also look at the 10 other teams, or 9 other teams, 10 if we get Andretti, and think, you know what, there are other academies out there as well, and certainly more so teams out there that might be more willing to put a female into their seat. But it won't hurt them, but at the same time, it might just leave them forgotten. So it's a really hard one to sort of judge, really. So Red Bull, if you're going to go to an academy, Red Bull is the one where you're going to be forgotten about the most. So I would urge them to look at potentially another academy, maybe Sauber, who don't have many drivers in there at all. Haas, again, or maybe knock on the door of McLaren, who are sort of building their portfolio, but don't really have a hand in yet, and think, do you know what, we've got a few drivers on board already, but maybe add me to that portfolio. Or Mercedes even, like you say, they don't have a big hand in the junior series either, or the academy side of things. So yeah, Red Bull gives them a start, it gives them a promotion, it gives them the sort of, it gives them that profile because people are more aware of them because of the Red Bull colours, they're recognisable, but at the same time, they're great drivers in there. Lawson, for example, might just end up being forgotten about. So yeah, I'd look at other academies before moving to Red Bull.
It is a very tricky one indeed, and we've done our damn best to try and figure it out and make some hopefully half logical calls. And like you say, hopefully some of these predictions will come true. And we'll have to do another podcast about all of the other 9 teams, possibly 10 with Andretti, that are going to be on the grid, and see if we can predict their 5-year future with all of their junior drivers as well. And
I was going to say, if we get 50% of these right, Thiemo, I think we're going to be reading people's lottery numbers out till the end of time, because these are some ballsy predictions, but you never know. Stranger things have happened.
On that note, that is all we've got time for in this edition of On the Kerbs Pub Chat. If you want more from Jacob and I, keep coming back regularly to a particular watering hole, and at least one of us will be here chewing the fat with each other, or some of the regulars that will flock here from all over the globe, because this is an internationally renowned pub at this point already. It's excellent.
And there are many different varieties of foreign beers on the tap as well.
Exactly. We're welcoming of everyone and anyone, especially if they bring some foreign beer for us to try. So do please keep that in mind. If you want more of us away from here, details of where you can find the pair of us will be in the description below. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening. Let us know your thoughts and possibly predictions in the comments and on socials, and we'll probably be back soon with another episode. In the meantime, Jacob, shall we go and grab another pint?
Let's go and grab another pint, and why not, as it's getting slightly more hotter this afternoon, let's take it to the beer garden.
Sounds like a plan. Love it.